When the president goes anywhere, there is a cavalcade of media that travel with him and are basically forced to talk about whatever the president is doing that day. That's why they constantly have these photo ops where the president goes to a swing state and he visits a factory and he answers like 2 questions and then he walks out and the local news all picks it up. Everybody who would go with him to the border when Air Force One landed somewhere along Texas or Arizona border would have to cover the mess that exists at our border. And as bad as crime is, Buck, and as bad as things are right now when it comes to inflation and the economy, the border is arguably worse than both of those things. Biden has been a disaster on multiple fronts, but arguably the border is the biggest mess out there right now, and they're pretending it doesn't exist.
It's been quite a 24 hours or so for the media, for the White House, and the exchanges between the two of them. I've got a bunch to get to. I wanted to start with, for me, the best is this line now. Peter Doocy over at Fox News asks Karine Jean-Pierre, why hasn't President Biden been to the border? I don't know what we have to do. The numbers are the worst they've ever been. It's getting on 6 million illegals that we know of who have crossed into the country. Almost none of them are really being deported or even going through a meaningful screening process after their initial credible fear interviews. I mean, it's a total mess. And yet here is what the White House, through KJP, says when asked, hey, is Biden actually going to go to the border? Play clip 2.
Kevin McCarthy says that he invited President Biden down to the border. How does the president RSVP? Well, we know the president's never been down to the border. The possible next speaker says that he wants him to go with him. So is he going to?
So look, he's been there. He's been to the border, and since he took office.
When did he go to the border?
Since he took office, the President Biden has been taking action to fix our immigration system and secure our border, and that's why on day one he put forward an immigration reform, a piece of legislation to deal with what is currently happening at the border. But that we're not seeing that from Republicans. We're not seeing a willingness to work with us on fixing a situation that's been around for decades now. Instead, they're doing political stunts. That's what they want to do. That's how they want to take care of the situation. But in the meantime, the president has secured record levels of funding for the Department of Homeland Security. We have over 23,000 agents working to secure the border. We've taken thousands of smugglers off the streets, and we're cutting down on asylum processing times. And a number of individuals arriving unlawfully from northern Central America and Venezuela is coming down significantly because of the actions that the president has taken.
So
Clay,
this is all just a lie.
But can I just say, when they say the border, they actually mean the physical going to the border, not this metaphysical, well, he's working hard on the border issue.
Yeah, and for people out there, so Biden went to the border. The argument they have made is he went to the border in 2008 for like a drive-by as a part of the 2008 presidential campaign. The time that he has been vice president, the time that he's now been president, he's never gone. And for people out there who say, remember we had the clip with it was Lester Holt and Kamala Harris, where Kamala Harris basically said the same thing that Karine Jean-Pierre did there, say, we've been to the border. And Lester Holt actually pushed back. And you heard Peter Doocy push back there because Karine Jean-Pierre directly lied. And for people who say, okay, why does it matter? Because that's the argument. Well, he's working on the border. Why does the president have to go there? When the president takes the media with him to the border, because and a lot of people, I think, recognize this, when the president goes anywhere, there is a cavalcade of media that travel with him and are basically forced to talk about whatever the president is doing that day. That's why they constantly have these photo ops where the president goes to a swing state and he visits a factory and he answers like 2 questions and then he walks out and the local news all picks it up. everybody who would go with him to the border when Air Force One landed somewhere along Texas or Arizona border would have to cover the mess that exists at our border. And as bad as crime is, Buck, and as bad as things are right now when it comes to inflation and the economy, the border is arguably worse than both of those things. Biden has been a disaster on multiple fronts, but arguably the border is the biggest mess out there right now. And they're pretending it doesn't exist. They are just flat out pretending that it doesn't exist. You remember when Karine Jean-Pierre, when Peter Doocy said, we've got people walking across the border. And we know Karine Jean-Pierre is not very smart, just based on how she's done her job over the past year or however long she's been in there now. But she laughed, Buck, and she said, people don't just walk across the border. That's not what they do. And yes, that's literally what they do.
Thousands a day. That's literally what they do.
Exactly what happens.
They wave down, I've seen it, they wave down Border Patrol. This isn't, people have to understand, the surge of illegal migrants, they're not overwhelming. There are some, and that's where the gotaways come in, but a huge majority of them are showing up and saying, here I am, I want my asylum. They're abusing the asylum process. This whole thing has been turned into a scam. They are not actual asylees. They are, I want access to the American economy and to the American welfare system, overwhelmingly economic refugees. That is what they are. That's not what the system is supposed to be for when it comes to asylum. So there's lying about this that goes on all the time. But I think part of the problem here is that the Democrats as a party don't actually see the Democrat base. If you ask your average Democrat base voter in any coastal city, any coastal area, any major city, what do you think of illegal immigration? They'll basically say it's fine. A lot of them don't really view this as an issue. They don't view it as a problem. In fact, what they view as a problem is the need for amnesty and the need for faster processing of people who come into the country illegally. Now, the Biden administration doesn't want to deal with this because a majority of the country doesn't actually see it that way. Every poll will show you majority of the American people across the nation don't actually think that illegal immigration is a good thing. They want it to be dealt with. But the Democrats don't want to upset the base, and really all they want is amnesty. So this is a replay in a lot of ways. We saw the Obama administration, the second term. What was the big push for? Amnesty. You are going to see, I know Republicans have the House, and so it's probably not going to go anywhere as a legal matter, but you're going to see the Democrats once again mount a massive effort. And some Republicans wanted to go along with amnesty this time around because ultimately, Clay, they don't view illegal immigration as a problem. The Democrat Party has switched. The New York Times in the year 2000 was writing editorials. The editorial board, not just one person. I mean, I remember this one about how it depresses the wages of workers. It illegal immigration disproportionately hurts the wages of African-American workers who are making their way up the wage scale. And it was, the unions were opposed to this. The New York Times was opposed to this. They've completely shifted. Now it's open borders. It's a free-for-all.
Well, in many ways, as soon as Trump had success talking about the need for a border wall, everything flipped. Everything almost overnight flipped as soon as Trump said, hey, we need border security. And all of a sudden, there's a lot of truth to it. Whatever Trump was for, the New York Times and the Washington Post and all the woke blue check brigade left-wing losers immediately opposed it. I mean, the perfect example of this, Buck, was when Trump came out and said, hey, schools need to open back up. And the American Academy of Pediatrics flipped their opinion medically. A lot of people don't talk about this, Buck, but they were actually kind of brave back in June of 2020. The American Academy of Pediatricians said kids need to be back in school. They are losing out health-wise. They're under far more danger from being remote than they are from being in school. And then Trump said, hey, we got to open up all the schools. And immediately, teachers' unions, the American Academy of Pediatrics, New York Times, everybody just flipped. And so whatever Trump was for, they immediately came out against. And Trump was right on the border. Trump was right on a huge majority, I believe, of the issues on which he campaigned. And the fact that the White House can get away, what's the new popular word? Gaslighting, Buck? The fact that the White House can get away with blatantly lying, with gaslighting the American public on the fact that Biden has been to the border, he hasn't been there at all. And Peter Doocy does a great job on these questions. But I think he needs to follow up and say, when was the last time Joe Biden has been to the border? Because my data reflects that it was 2008 as a part of the vice presidential campaign back in that day. Why has he not been willing in 14 years to travel to the United States border? That's a pretty long time if you're a politician. How many times have you been to the border, Buck?
3 or 4.
3 or 4.
In the last
and you're
few years.
You're a radio guy, right? And I would like to go to the border. Outkick has had somebody at the border. Tommy's been down at the border. Like, if we can manage to get to the border, seems like the president, who gets to dictate where his big plane takes him all the time, could actually go to the border. And I just wonder, why is this any different than what Kamala Harris said when Lester Holt called her out? The fact that the president claims that he's been to the border when it's a direct lie. Where are all the fact checkers? Where are all the misinformation experts? Why do they vanish?
And everyone's going to see
stories
again
like these?
as the surge happens, and we are now at least 20 million illegals in the country, maybe 30 million. I mean, no one really knows, but the 11 million number is entirely untenable when it's almost 6 million now in 2 years. I mean, it's going on.
Here's a good question for you, Buck. How many countries out there have 20 million or more illegal immigrants in the entire world? Is there another country that has as many illegal immigrants as we do, and even close?
I think there's nothing that's even in the neighborhood in terms of illegality as a percentage of overall population. You'd have to look at it. But for example, a lot of the European countries, in Italy, they have a big illegal immigration problem from North Africa. In Eastern Europe, they have an illegal immigration problem from the Middle East. So it depends where you are. But places like Sweden, they've just taken in asylum seekers from all over what we used to call the third world, the developing world. And it's dramatically changed those countries in terms of the politics and culture. That's what's when you have a country of 15 million or 10 million people, and you take in two or 3 million people over a decade or two who don't share your language, don't share your culture, don't share your history, it does actually have an effect on the place. I mean, and European politicians have started to have to wake up to this, the ones who aren't just all-out globalist socialists. But in our context, again, so yeah, we're the only country in the world that I'm aware of for whom border security, according to our elites, is racist.
Yeah.
By the way, Japan doesn't let anybody become Japanese unless you're born
China
there and you're
doesn't really
Japanese.
either. I mean,
right. There are a lot of countries where it's just like, look, this is our country. We control our borders. End of story. In this country, we're taking in 1 million legal immigrants every year. 1 million legal immigrants.
Yeah.
There's some people say that's actually a lot of legal immigrants. Like, is 10 million too many? I mean, that's a discussion too. No one ever has that really these days.
We have the
but some on
largest
right-
population of legal immigrants as a percentage of our population in over 100 years.
Right. It's a question of how you line it up with assimilation and the needs of the population that's already here. Immigration is supposed to benefit the people who are here already. Of every race and ethnicity, our immigration policy is supposed to make America better for everyone. Black, white, Hispanic,
Asian,
you name it, right? It's for the American people, Asian, for everybody. Instead, what we have right now is this free-for-all system where people from over 100 countries just come into the country, and anyone who says they have an issue with it is told that that's racist. But, Clay, the Democrats pretend that they also want to secure – they'll say they want a secure border, but they don't. They don't at all. And look, this is one of my big frustrations in Arizona and in some of these states, Arizona in particular. Well, you voted to save democracy, independence, but your country's actually falling apart because of the lawlessness and the lack of sovereignty.
No, you're 100% right. And I hope that we get follow-up questions to the lies from Karine Jean-Pierre about the border and Biden having been there in the newest White House press briefing.